Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm Sujeev Shakya, Chair of Nepal Economic Forum, and on behalf of the Nepal Economic Forum Advisory Board members, Executive Board members, and the leadership team, I'm very happy to welcome you to the third edition of NEFmeet, an annual event of the Nepal Economic Forum, today to continue our discussion towards connected economy. So we have three speakers lined up for you, and we just had to start. We're generally known to start on time, but today the flight got a bit delayed, and I think we took a bit of a gamble, but we are very happy that Dr. Shamika Ravi is in, and so she's there, and Preeti Adhikay flew in on Friday from US, and Saloni Setia flew in last night from Europe. So thank you, all the three speakers. And as we have a lot of panels with male in the city going on, we decided to line up three women for today's NEFmeet. So many of you are familiar with our work. For those who are not, Nepal Economic Forum, as also a reminder, a not-for-profit organization. We aim to be Nepal's premier economic policy and research institution. We are an impact-driven economic development think tank that seeks to redefine Nepal's development discourse by analyzing, facilitating, and disseminating contemporary issues on society and the economy. And we work through different centers. There's the Business Policy Research Center. You would be signed into some of our newsletters, our products. There's a Center for Digital Transformation. We've been working on federal Nepal. We have the Nepal in the World that explores the potential of Nepalis working and living in 180 countries. And then the Himalaya Future Forum, many of you were there as speakers, participated in the inaugural meet this year in February, and that's an annual meet that we work on. So it's a very uniquely designed model where this not-for-profit is sponsored and supported by BEAD Management, where 20% of the time of everybody who works at BEAD Management goes into operations of Nepal Economic Forum. So that's how, through voluntary contributions, NEF moves. So that's how we are. And we have a robust internship and fellowship program. More than 125 alumni now across the world. In many of the institutions that you are in, you would find some of our team members out there. And this has been an incubation center for a lot of thought leaders that perhaps is going to contribute towards Nepal's development, progress, and the future. And our agenda is very clear. We push private sector-led growth with capabilities for global leadership. And that's our fight continues against cartels, myopia, and continuously push for the agenda of Nepalis to not only invest here more and also outside. There are many familiar faces, and I would like to acknowledge today Dr. Shankar Sharma, our former board member, also our ambassador designate to India, and the apt time to come into this event. So three speakers we have, and then we'll then later ask the speakers to come on the stage, and we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A. And I assure you, we should not be here more than about 5:15. We should get over for tea and coffee. So before we begin, this was not designed. I remember when I met Shamika in September. The day before I met Shamika, I had met Professor Vivek Debroy, a dear friend, and today I just thought it is very important to remember him. This was not designed when we discussed this program for 11th November in September. It was not designed to be a moment where we are going to remember him, but he has been a great friend of the Nepal Economic Forum. He was a chair of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister of India, where Shamika is a member. And I remember when one of the meetings I had with Vivek way back in UK in one of the events, we had this meeting, and he vanished in the evening for about 2 hours. And I was wondering, where is he gone? And when we have over dinner, I was asking him, where were you? And he said, I do my writing, 2,500 words a day, wherever I am. And so he was very inspirational. So when I released my updated version of Unleashing Nepal, he was very grateful to read the draft and write some blurb for that book. And he continuously supported Nepal Economic Forum. He was here very early on in the days of Nepal Economic Forum when the discourse of federalism was just beginning, and he came in to contribute on the discourse on how should Nepal build its federal structure before the constitution was promulgated. So that's when he was there, and we were lucky to have him in 2022, September, as the keynote speaker for the NEFmeet 2022, our inaugural NEFmeet. We will miss him dearly. And I think day before, as I was talking to Shamika, this is like he was a great guide, philosopher, friend, with whom you could talk on anything, from his collection of pens to the translations he did, more than 5 million words of translation, to the economic writing and the thinking process. So we just thought we should celebrate his life. I was telling Suparna, his wife, day before, that we are going to, in Kathmandu, celebrate his life. And maybe the best way to celebrate him is to remember him for a minute. So may I request everybody to rise for a minute to remember Bibek Debroy's great life he had in this planet. So with that, I'll come in and later talk a bit about the products around Nepal Economic Forum and how you can be in touch through subscribing different products. But now we would go into the program where we would have a keynote address and a presentation from Dr. Shamika Ravi, who is currently a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and Secretary to Government of India. Previously, Dr. Ravi was Director of Research at Brookings India, Vice President Economic Policy at the Observer Research Foundation, and non-resident Fellow of Governance Studies programs at Brookings Institution. A academic, she teaches at the Indian School of Business and many other institutions. So today, the theme is about towards connected economy, and we have 3 speakers, as I mentioned before. Preeti will later on come and talk about how people connect with the Great Nepali Diaspora network she's founded and operating. Saloni is going to come in, who also is our advisory board member, talk about how entrepreneurs and professionals, especially young people, are connecting. But now the initial presentation would be on how Nepal connects with a large economy, the Indian economy, that we have seen growing for the past 10 years, especially the last 10 years has been exceptional growth. And what are some of the key things that we have been able to learn from, the key issues that we can think of and learn from. And so she would spend about 30 minutes of time for her presentation, and later on we were going to have time for question and answer.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Sujeev. It's a great pleasure for me to be back in Kathmandu after 11 years. It's been too long. Every time I visit, I wonder why we aren't here more often. We really should get a lot of our young scholars. This is such an important country for us. We think we know you, but there is so much we need to do. And part of the reason I'm here is also to foster relationship between scholars of the 2 countries. As someone who's been working in public policy now for 21 years, for me, the new Nepal Economic Forum becomes an important platform and a gateway for the scholars. I'm currently with the Economic Advisory Council. We sit within the Niti Aayog, which is the think tank of the government. But there is a very large and thriving community of think tanks in India. Many of them are young, which makes them extremely agile. The interests are very wide. We're looking at environment, we're looking at connectivity. In fact, I've tried to bring in a lot of data even in the international relations and the foreign policy side of scholarship while I was at Brookings for 10 years. My core interest, however, is India and the neighborhood. Part of my job when I was invited was to give you a sense of how the Indian economy is transforming. Over and beyond a handful of macro indicators that You talk about all the time, the media talks about all the time. I'm here to really give you a snapshot of a very broad range of the real economy. And by real, I mean as against merely the financial sector or the size of the economy. And before I begin to do that, I do want to spend a minute on Bibek. I've had the great opportunity to work with him as a part-time member in the Economic Advisory Council when it was formed under Modi administration in 2017. I was a part-time member then. I was younger, I was more impatient, and it took someone like Bibek to really guide me and mentor me to really understand how things function within the government and how do you get government and the administration to open windows to accept research insights. Traditionally, I think it's by nature bureaucracy is conservative, and it's the case definitely in India. Despite the political big movements and the aspirations themselves which are exploding, bureaucracy has its own pace of life. And researchers sometimes do feel frustrated. But I think what Bibek taught me in the last 8-9 years is that, we have to be prepared with our insight and the research itself, with the ideas, preferably in a translational format, in an application format. And when the window of opportunity opens, we are ready to plug these ideas in. Because dynamic economies like India, Nepal, in fact, the entire neighborhood, are opening in ways which aren't always predictable. There are new windows of opportunity opening, and I think as scholars, the job really becomes one of having good, thorough ideas prepared and ready to just plug in. So I do think that the time is right for scholars to rise and shine and to publish, particularly I think across disciplines and across countries. I will give you a snapshot of some of that. One small comment on Bibek's scholarship, Sujeev, that we often forget is, while he translated tons and tons of Sanskrit texts, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, and so on, as an elder and as a mentor, there is a lot of knowledge which is not documented. Have patience. He's a good person, but don't always trust him. This person will tend to sit on the file. These are things that nobody else really prepares you for, and this is where it matters to have a research community, to have a scholarly community which builds on existing. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants here. So he was a giant, and many of us in the economic and the public policy realm of India and modern Indian policy making, we are definitely going to miss him tremendously. So thank you for remembering him, and thank you for getting me here. I'll start first with why growth. Now, this is particularly for a lot of my European friends, and when I visit Europe, I hear about degrowth. I hear about, yes, issues of sustainability can be addressed if we grow slowly, or there is a concept of degrowing. Let me make it very clear. In India, growth is non-negotiable. We have to grow. We have just come out of poverty. So for us, we are still under $3,000 per capita per year, which means growth for us is an absolute necessity. To give you an idea of where we are, just 48 years back, really 2 generations, an average South Korean, an average Chinese, and an average Indian had the same per capita income. Today, South Korea is 12 times richer and China is 4.5 times richer in per capita terms. None of these are forces of nature. They don't just happen. Growth is an outcome of deliberate policy making and reforms. So growth is not something that is random and that just happens. It is very much an outcome of what we do. And that's the larger message when we look at growth and compare with some of our fast-growing countries within Asia. This is, of course, India, per capita income of India, and it's a very impressive trajectory. The reflex answer to the question, when did India's exponential growth phase start? The reflex answer that most economists also tend to give is 1991, when we began to liberalize. However, that is not the case. That is the time when we began to dismantle the core license permit Raj. We had an extremely inhibiting, extremely limiting economic regime where private enterprise to a large extent was inhibited by the policies, and the government was a very active player. In 91, we began to dismantle the license permit Raj, but the inflection point is around 2000. So the lesson is that it takes a little while after you change the rules for growth to pick up. That's number one. But number two, merely changing the rules doesn't do the trick. You need the government to make large capital expenditure in very important sectors like infrastructure. It was in late 1990s and 2000, it was really the Vajpayee regime around which we saw connecting every nook and cranny of the country through major highway networks. We saw privatization of airlines. We saw power sector reform when India went from being a power deficient country to becoming a power surplus country. We saw the telecom reforms. Of course, what people remember today are the scams and so on, but we often forget how revolutionary the reforms within the telecom sector was. We used to wait 6 months to get a telephone connectivity. Now, on average, an Indian citizen, let's say in Delhi, Bombay, has 2 phones or perhaps 3. Every household has multiple. So this trajectory is not very old, but it is now consistent. India continues to be the fastest growing major economy in the world since the pandemic. And every year, the IMF projections, the OECD projections, the World Bank projections, they're all projecting India in ways that it often needs to be corrected, and the corrections are always upwards. So in fact, if anything, we are far more conservative than the true dynamic nature of the economy itself. But not to be over-reliant on GDP as a metric, we should look at the human development metric as well. Human development looks at indicators of health, education, gender. And this is when you compare India with China here. Unlike in the economic growth, where we are roughly 20 to 22 years behind China, in terms of the human development indicators, it's almost like a parallel line. Here, the horizontal difference tells you how many years behind. We are roughly 8 years behind China. And that itself is a very important thing to note, that while economically we are 22 years, why is it that developmentally we are doing relatively better? And I think the democratic structure of the country, the fact that we have elections which cannot be won if you ignore development altogether. Whether it's a federal level, so central government elections, whether it is a panchayat election, every election, development and indicators of local development become a very important electoral tool. Of course, that might have its own bag of problems where you have too much populist moves. But this, in fact, the outcome is that development in India is happening at a far more rapid pace. If you look at the world poverty clock, it's remarkable that despite the pandemic, we remained one of the few major countries which continue to be on the target to achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 1, which is reduction of absolute poverty. Right? Today, this is the latest data as of spring of 2024. India's absolute poverty is now below 3%. And we have all grown up studying the slogan, Garibi Hatao. Everyone talks of poverty in India, but it has taken us this long, and therefore we are at a very historic time window when India has actually managed to reduce absolute poverty below 3%. It truly is a historic achievement. Of course, a lot of it is on the back of rapid economic growth. The other point to note is far richer countries, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, many of them are going to miss the SDG 1 target on account of COVID. So it's not how much wealth or how wealthy the country is. It's how the economic progress takes everyone along. That's why we care so much about poverty. So we are far poorer than these richer countries, which are 3x, 4x per capita GDP. but we have managed to attain SDG 1, which is below 3% absolute poverty. If you look at maternal mortality rate, which is yet another important metric to look at, the number of mothers who die during childbirth, India's reduction of maternal mortality rate is more than twice as fast as the global average. So the orange bars are the maternal mortality rate for the global economy, and the blue bars are for India. This again is happening, of course, largely on the back of economic growth, but remember, it's a very large country. Many of our SDGs are not all India level problems anymore. 10 states in India have already attained the IMR, the infant mortality and the maternal mortality. So we have concentrated 6 states or 7 states where this problem persists. So we are really in the realm of what we call precision policy making now. That's why you'll hear of aspirational districts. You'll hear of aspirational blocks. There are very few big all India level goals of this nature. This is infant mortality rate. The size of the ball indicates the size of the population. These are states of India. You'll see the poorest states on the right-hand side, the southern states in the middle, and on the left you'll see the rest. You see every state of the country, and on the y-axis you have per capita GDP. With economic growth in every state, infant mortality rate is really crashing. The biggest increases are in poor states like Odisha, Bihar, UP, etc. For us, this is what economic growth is. Sometimes when you pick up the newspapers and you hear India is getting intolerant, violent, and so on, as economists, we really look for objective measures to look at these things. So you study riots. A riot is a variable which is very well defined, and it doesn't change over time. A riot is a violent episode which involves 5 or more people for a common purpose, and it gets registered in the local police station. If you see since the 50s and 60s, India in the late 80s and early 90s used to see more than 1 lakh, which is more than 100,000 riots a year. Do you see the structural decline since economic growth started? And as economists, of course, there are lots of theory, but a very compelling one is that the opportunity cost of street violence has now increased. So it's not that we have started doing policing particularly well, or we've started spending a lot more on policing. We've had various kinds of reforms even within the police, but that's not the story. The story here is the tolerance for a lot of street violence has come down. So you are seeing that the number of riots, in fact, today, India is far more peaceful than we have been in the last 50 years if you just measure riots. Of course, we are all on cell phones, and one riot is one too many. We are a highly hyper-connected world today. But objectively, if you see, far, far more peaceful. If you see crime against women, these are all the states, you see that rapes, again, because it's well-defined, the definitions don't change with time, you're seeing there's been a structural break. Around 2016-17, most states, though not all, have seen a structural break in terms of number of rapes. These are BJP states, Congress states, RJD states, JDU states, regardless of the political parties. And one very compelling research that came out was published in The Lancet, which showed that it was the building of 120 million rural toilets, which led to a reduction of 22% in assaults on women and 14% reduction in rapes or reported rapes. So the toilets, which were built because many of us argued for why open defecation has direct impact with health and public health metrics, has had a very important unintended consequence. It has had on safety of women and girls. And that's the nature of policy making, that we push for a particular intervention based on certain insights, certain empirical truths, facts, what we find across the developing world, maybe developed world. But there are many other aspects to these interventions which are quite unintended. So today what you're seeing, and particularly in rural India, is safety for girls and women has gone up on account of these. Toilets have been a very major scheme. Now, in terms of self-reliance, because you do hear Make in India, self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar, that's the Hindi term for it, which means self-reliance. There are some sectors which are of strategic interest to us. in which we want to be self-reliant. We do not want to be over-dependent on any other power. Food is the first. What you notice is in terms of the food production index, that's the left-hand side panel, 100, it measures of the amount and the food that you eat, how much do you produce. We used to be barely 23, 30. Today we are 126. Which means we are producing far more than what we are consuming. In terms of basic cereals, India has a problem of abundance today. We are trying to now diversify away from cereals towards other kind of crops. And so we are also looking at the nutritional outcomes. How does the minimum support price, etc., how do you alter cropping pattern? Right? So today, we are self-sufficient as far as food is concerned. If you look at the second panel, it tells you what fraction of our imports is food. 1/3 of our imports used to be food just 40, 50 years back. Today, it's around 2.3%. It'll never be zero, remember, because we are a connected country. We are a country which is increasingly opening to the rest of the world. We have lots of trade and investment treaties with many, many countries. We will never be zero because we are not insular. We have a community. In fact, you should think of the Indian economy as having the size and scale of a Germany combined with 2 sub-Saharan Africa. Which means there is a cohort, there is a demographic which consumes like Germany, which travels like Germany, which adopts technology like Germany. So we do like our Swiss cheeses and New Zealand milk products and etc. So it will never be zero. We are not going back to pre-1991 phase. Right? But our domestic economy, unlike China, is a strategic asset for us. Unlike a repressed domestic demand, which becomes particularly vulnerable to global turmoils, that's why you're seeing the slowdown in China, also on account of global, but there are other reasons, overcapacity, etc. For us, the Indian economy, domestic demand is a very, very important factor. And that's why you see that the impact of global turmoil is relatively less on Indian economy compared to the Chinese or most other emerging market for that matter. Now, if you look at energy, oil, and this will perhaps help you appreciate why our foreign policy has been shaped almost entirely on what our needs are, domestic needs are. Again, I reiterate, we have just come out of poverty. We have great need for high economic growth over the next several decades, hence non-negotiable. What you see is the per capita consumption in energy is just shooting up. In fact, now it has totally escalated. That's what a poor, fast-growing economy looks like. Our energy consumption is shooting. But if you look at what fraction of our energy consumed is imported, and we compare ourselves with 3 major economies like China and the US, you're seeing that in the case of Chinese, their energy dependence has stabilized around 13, 14% over the last several years now. The US, since shale, of course, but strategically now they're weaning themselves away from over-dependence on imports for energy needs. So you're seeing now it's down to single digits. It's around 6.5, 6.7, I think. In India, if you see the imported segment of our energy, we are around 33% of our energy is really imported. That's very high, and it shows no sign of slowing down. Hence, our energy security is going to dictate a lot of our stance. You know, manufacturing, I must confess, we have had a complete 180-degree reorientation. If you were in Delhi 10 years back, the common phrase you would hear people in Delhi speak is that India has missed the manufacturing bus. Because China is doing so much of it and they're competitive, we're not going to be able to keep up. But since the Modi administration has come in, there's been, of course, a lot of research and of course, the world today is a new world if you look at what's happening across. We see resurgence of what we call industrial policy in most developed countries of the world. And industrial policy really is euphemism for saying, look, we want our manufacturing jobs back. And the government is going to spend money and resources and strategically get a lot of these manufacturing capabilities back home. Because we have realized after much turmoil globally that manufacturing sector is not just about producing something cheaply. It's also about livelihoods. It's about jobs. And the kind of upheaval we are seeing in Western Europe and in the US on account of loss of manufacturing jobs, we clearly want to avoid that. That's number one. Number two, as China loses its competitive advantage in terms of rising labor costs, and of course the slowdown overall, India begins to emerge as that second large market with this massive labor surplus, which has the capability to plug into this next phase. But remember, while China's growth in manufacturing was backed by the OECD market, the rest of the world continues to grow. Africa is growing, Latin America is growing, Asia is growing. And the demand for manufactured items, and I'm not talking about the extremely high-tech, even simple manufactured items, is continuing to rise. And we do need another engine. And India is well poised to do that. But remember, it's a large country. We have many states, and states are very powerful in India. A federal structure becomes then a very important factor when you begin to understand manufacturing capability within India. Then, of course, we have 500 million people whom we have to move out of agriculture. So manufacturing, therefore, becomes of strategic interest. Services is not going to be able to employ such a large number. While services remains the fastest growing and the engine of growth for the Indian economy, strategically, manufacturing becomes very, very important. So there has been a complete reorientation. Therefore, schemes like PLI and Make in India Defense, privatization, opening up of the space sector, opening up of almost all sectors in the economy today to private investments and foreign direct investments. On connectivity, it's a new India. If you consider that in the last 10 years, every Indian now has a bank account, an Aadhaar, which is a biometric electronic ID, and mobile access. So we are a networked economy, quite unlike what we were 10 years back. And some of the fastest growing sectors, ag tech, health tech, ed tech, right? The entire startup space is all backed or all serviced on this core architecture, which is digitized India. The fact that every Indian is part of this network today. You hear the government side of the story, which is that we do welfare far better now and more efficiently because the leakages have come down. In fact, the leakages have come down and the savings are in tune of 1.5% of India's GDP. That's what we are saving by plugging leakages and doing direct benefit transfer where the government puts money into the bank account of the beneficiary. But that's the government side of the story. The more vibrant and really the fascinating side is the private sector. The fact that every Indian is now networked and has bank account and has mobile connectivity means there is a very large segment of the economy where there is tremendous trial and error, experimentation we've never seen before. And I often joke that, when we were in colleges, the cool kids had bands and you had a guitar and you sang. Not anymore. The cool kids have startups. So if you go to the business schools, you have incubators and they're so well connected. The financing is coming in so smoothly. You have specialized institutions which are looking at incubating these kind of startups across different sectors of the economy. Health, education, infrastructure. So it's a great new economy backed by this. The fastest growing e-commerce segment is not Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, Chennai. It's Lucknow, Raipur, right? It's all these smaller parts. It's basically because Indians are now part of the network. If you look at any amenity, and this is a conscious government decision, that every basic amenity is now going to be available to all Indians everywhere. We call this the saturation policy, which includes electrification, piped drinking water, of course toilets, bank account, mobile connectivity. This basket keeps expanding. But what you see is there is no difference in terms of improvements across different socioeconomic groups. You can look at Hindu households, Muslim households, OBCs, SC, STs, whatever. And mind you, this is not government data. These are survey data. More than 12 lakh households. These are self-reported data from households. So the improvements are tremendous. It's a large economy where not every state is growing at the same pace. That's why you will hear stories like Punjab. So Punjab is the dark black line. You see the entire neighborhood of Punjab is growing much, much faster. Haryana today is nearly 3 times richer than Punjab. So the whole country is not growing together. There are very, very big variations across, right? India is again very large. There is no north-south divide as far as wealth is concerned. This is a dynamic graph where every green dot indicates 1,000 rich households, a yellow dot indicates 1,000 middle-class household, and a red dot indicates 1,000 poor households. What you notice, though, is you can draw a line from Srinagar to Kanyakumari. India has an east-west divide as far as growth and wealth is concerned. Our poverty is, by and large, an eastern phenomenon. While industrialization and rapid growth is happening if you look at the entire Western belt, because historically that has been the more industrialized areas. Industrialization begets further industrialization and experimentation. This is where a very large amount of modern industries, etc., are coming in. A lot of our national policies, therefore, you cannot have a national rural employment guarantee scheme in Bihar and Assam, which looks the same as it does in Maharashtra and Gujarat. Nobody is willing to till land for a minimum price in Gujarat and Maharashtra. But it works perfectly fine in Assam and Bihar. So a lot of our national schemes, therefore, like I said, we are getting into precision policy making now. Very few all India level simple schemes. Labor force participation rising, though not as fast as we would like. It's rising for all cohorts, men and women. If you look at overall unemployment rate, of course, it's declining. It's around 3.8 as of the latest number. We do have a problem of youth unemployment. The second panel is of people under the age of 30. It's again a global phenomenon. The OECD euphemistically calls it youth inactivity, which means young people are not ready to settle down into jobs the way we were. They want to wait. They're waiting for the right job. All right? This is very much an Indian phenomenon as well. If you look at satellite data, alternate forms of data, which is not government or self-reported, but just how much of growth is happening, you see the red parts are places where you have growth beyond 5. The average there is around 10% growth year on year. Do you see how the red part of the country is expanding? So very rapid economic growth happening in some of the poorest regions. In fact, if you see our entire boundary, Sujeev, is red. So some of the fastest growing segments of the Indian market is the boundaries along Nepal. And this is the great opportunity. We have to think of how do we use this connectivity which is within and across states within India to basically bolster the same across the border with Nepal. I will end on something called narrative economics. As an economist, my job is also to introduce you to certain areas of economics which are no longer within the realm of corporate finance. In corporate finance, we used to study narrative economics, which is firms would plant stories. They would plant stories about themselves, and they would plant stories about rivals, because it had direct impact on the share price. So while something which was very common in corporate finance, now there is a book that Robert Shiller has written from Harvard called Narrative Economics, and we are applying it now to geoeconomics. And I'm presenting here a story from a Brookings paper that we wrote 1 year into the pandemic. The story here begins at the beginning of the pandemic, and the data, this is open source data from Google. It's called the GDELT data. It measures tone of global media. So more than 100 languages, so you have several 100 million data points in this graph. That's why these are so interesting. What you notice is that these are natural language processing which measures whether the news is positive or negative. How negative, how positive. And what you notice at the beginning of the pandemic, all these countries, and I'm looking at, of course, India, China, the US, Sweden, because Sweden was the unique country which did not have a lockdown, remember, and Germany. What you notice is all the countries are getting negative global coverage, because that's the job of the media. The job of the media is to tell sad stories and bad stories and break bad news. But what you have seen since the pandemic within a year is that there is now a great divergence happening in global media. This is not Indian media, this is not Chinese media, this is not US media, this is global media. All the media that Google has, right, in more than 100 languages. What you notice is the democracies in the world continue to get negative coverage. Again, that's what free press does. What you see with respect to global coverage of China, quite remarkably, has not only pulled away from the democracies, global coverage of China and Chinese economy is now positive. This is not censorship within China. So this is not Chinese media being told to put good stories about the Chinese economy or China as a country. This is media in Ecuador, in New Zealand, in Australia, Sri Lanka, across the world, more than 100 languages. This is narrative economics which is taking fold, right? You can do a lot more with this data. This is a campaign. Of course, what I'm showing you is for these 5 countries, we can do this for many other countries. Data allows you to do a very large amount of research. I will end it by showing you the second slide on the same story, the source of the news. And what you notice is the dark line, the black line at the bottom, that is the most negative news on India. It's coming from sources that are unknown. And it's the same unknown sources which are also planting the most positive sources on China, as you can see on top. The most positive news on China is also coming from unknown sources. Big data, natural language processing, allows you to do a tremendous, I'm just giving you a very broad snapshot of what the real geo-economics of today looks like. When you pick up a newspaper and you read an article, you cannot take it as face value. And as researchers, part of our effort is to develop capability within universities, but also within government ministries. We are getting data scientists across some of our central universities, and I'm not talking about IITs. We have lots of youngsters that love to do this kind of work. So we're doing a lot of mapping of where are stories coming from. Why are institutions under attack? How is it linked to economic growth? What are the institutions that are particularly vulnerable? Which are the countries which are particularly vulnerable to these kind of narrative economics? Is this only of academic interest? Unfortunately not. Because when you're sitting at the negotiation table, whether it's a trade deal, and you have human rights put up as the counter, you know there's something more happening. I'm not downplaying human rights. As a plural democracy, we have institutions which are meant to safeguard, and we're extremely concerned about issues like that. But data allows you to pick up what used to be confined to the realm of business, today is happening at a global level, and countries are employing what used to be called narrative economics to drive a lot of the narratives on particular countries. Right? And as researchers, our job, this is also a Brookings paper, our job is to continue to just put it out and understand how international relations and trade and economic relations between countries, what are they being driven by? Real factors, but also certain, sometimes manufactured factors. So it's a fascinating new world. I welcome you to this nature of data science, but I also welcome you to read all of these, whatever excites you on this. They're all published papers. They're all available online. They're peer-reviewed articles. And to the younger scholars in the room, I welcome you to join us in furthering some of this research and perhaps, hopefully, also for Nepal. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Shamika. That was very fascinating. I think, I know I just allowed a few minutes extra because this was very fascinating. And I think some of the things that you said, few of the things that really strike me a lot is that I remember when you began this too, when with Vivek I used to talk about, he used to say, I used to have to write. I have to write on Nepal. And a lot of people used to say, what's the use of writing on the future of Nepal, on policy changes? And used to say, you have to write on Nepal because of the fact that sometime when a bureaucrat is looking for something, you have something. I think that was a very interesting, sort of memory to come back to. And I think the cost of riots in Nepal also, we've stopped seeing what we call a chakka jam. And to have a full Nepal Bandh is becoming very difficult. The social cost of, the economic cost of a Nepal Bandh, a whole closure of Nepal is becoming very difficult. I think that was, and two more points I take away is one on the provincial strategy, and I think there's a lot we can learn from as to, we are also now, through the new constitution, we have 7 provinces and how each one of them from Bagmati to Karnali are so different. And then this was fascinating, the narrative economics. Thank you, Shamika. So we change gears and we now invite Preeti Adhikay onto stage. And so this is again on connecting. So if you've been following the buzz around Nepali diaspora and hearing of this word called TGND, so the Great Nepali Diaspora, she's the founder. And thank you for flying in for this event. And we, when at Nepal Economic Forum, we started the Global Nepali Network that was anchored by Deva Shrestha, who currently lives in Vancouver. And Preeti was starting off this, and they said, why have multiple institutions? So this is something we should support, and let Preeti lead it. And I've been very fortunate to be in a couple of our events in US, and she dabbles in private equity space, so, and hopefully through this network bring enough credibility to Nepal and connect with the investors and narrate a new story for the Nepali diaspora. So Preeti, over to you.
Did you know that a Nepali entrepreneur has a chip that's on the Mars rover? How many people knew that? Think about it. A Nepali entrepreneur has a chip on the Mars rover, on the rover that's on Mars. How many of you knew that a Nepali entrepreneur, his technology lights up Times Square in New York City? Incredible, right? How many of you knew that there is a female Nepali astronaut who's about 26 years old? How many people knew that? How many of you knew that there is, at the Oscars Museum in LA, the head of exhibitions is a Nepali woman? For people that follow American football, how many of you knew that a Nepali entrepreneur has a house next to Tom Brady? I have incredible stories like these, of the Nepali diaspora, and that's what I'm here to talk about. But to begin, when we talk about a connected economy, we talk about so many different things, right? We talk about infrastructure and digital transformation and geopolitics, and those are all really, really important things. But one thing that we've been missing for the longest time is connecting people, connecting the dots. That's why the Great Nepali Diaspora was born, and that's what I'm here to share about. So I started the Great Nepali Diaspora, or TGND, 2 years ago, with a very, very simple objective. On a personal level, I felt like I didn't want to be one more complainer, one more person that says, oh, nothing is going to happen in Nepal. We're too small. We're between India and China. We're dependent on donor agencies. Our government doesn't work, right? So for me, on a personal level, this was a quest to do something that's productive. But a more logical reason was that the timing is so right for the diaspora. Let me explain. We have about 30 million people, Nepalese, and a growing number of people that are outside Nepal. At this point, if you look at the diaspora, I know that the news covers a lot about migrants and the sad stories and so on, but there are incredible stories coming out of the diaspora as well. Which means that the Nepali diaspora is highly educated, has incredible jobs, incredible disposable income, and more importantly, I think the Nepali diaspora wants to contribute to Nepal. I think that makes all the difference, right? We joke that we call it the new midlife crisis. And it's true for people from any community, right? You go abroad to study, to work, but at some point you want to come back, you want to do something for Nepal. For the Nepalis, the timing is now, where there is this growing group of people that have this sense of urgency, that wants to contribute, but haven't felt like they've had a platform. So in terms of what we do at the Great Nepali Diaspora, we've thought of things as step 1 and step 2. So step 1 has always been connecting the diaspora, and number 2 is making meaningful connections to Nepal. Step 1, especially because the diaspora has always been very fragmented. You know, if you just look at the US or any other country in the world, the Nepali diaspora, we've been separated by our location. You know, people in Boston versus Australia are not really connected. We're also very fragmented by the industries we work in. So researchers have been so separate from entrepreneurs and people in the creative field and so on. And then also, our ethnicity also plays a part. So we've also seen that the Nepali diaspora has also been really, really fragmented by, our caste, our community we belong to. So at the Great Nepali Diaspora, we've made a really, really conscious effort. How do you bring Nepalis or global professionals with roots in Nepal and connect them through one platform, right? So where we're trying to be really, really inclusive in terms of our leadership, in terms of the programs that we do, but also try to find meaningful ways to contribute. In terms of, there's a lot of activities we do. If you follow us on LinkedIn or see our website, you'll see a lot of activities, but we've actually looked at 3 things in particular, and I'd love to share about those with you. So one really, really important thing has been really being this neutral entity and doing an audit of things in Nepal, looking at the gaps that exist, looking at the duplication that happens, and providing expertise or providing some kind of resources. I'll share a little bit in terms of some of the work that we do. Number 1 is this project that I'm super proud of. It's called the Diaspora Mapping Survey, which is basically a collection of data about the Nepali diaspora. So Nepalis have been leaving Nepal for years and years, I think from 60s, if not earlier, right? But there is no entity, not even the Nepali government, that has any information, or actually, I shouldn't say any information, that has, robust information about the diaspora, where we are, what we do, what we're capable of, right? Which means that we're not one collective voice. In our adopted countries, in our adopted home countries, whether it's the US or Australia, we're not visible because we're not counted, right? And in our home countries, Nepal, we're not, again, a collective because we're not really showcasing what we're capable of. So the Diaspora Mapping Survey is an incredible project. It's a group of data scientists and social scientists and researchers that have come together. We're in our second phase of work. We're doing focus groups and so on. What we're really hoping is that becomes a foundation for future research, even advocacy for policy and whatnot. So that's something that we're super, super proud of. Something recently that we've started are a few initiatives. One is on aviation safety in Nepal, which, whenever an aircraft crashes, we all get so emotional about it. It's something that, I heard there have been about 27 air crashes in the last 30 years, which is pretty crazy. So one thing that we've done is bringing together experts from the diaspora as well as non-Nepalis from the aviation sector, really looking at how things are happening in Nepal. What are the gaps there? So we have an interesting group forming, and we hope to present our recommendations really soon. Similar to that is a long-term disaster preparedness project that we're working on with some entities in Nepal and abroad, where we are looking at the recent floods, COVID, and whatnot, and really looking at changing the perception of Nepalis, all of us, in terms of really thinking about long-term planning and preparedness. So with climate change, all of us know that disasters are going to be more frequent, more intense, and we want to be really prepared in terms of thinking about infrastructure and all of that. So apart from all of those, entrepreneurship has always been a really big focus for TGND. You heard from Dr. Shamika as well in terms of what startups can do in terms of having that domino effect in society. So what we've done is we've run one cohort of a non-technical entrepreneurship, which is people that don't really have a technical background. We've taken them through a cohort, and they've done well. We actually ran 2 cohorts of a technical entrepreneurship, which is people based in Nepal and around the world. We connected them to investors and mentors. Some examples are Nepal, that's based here, and few other companies that are based in US and Europe. So some of these startups have done really, really well in terms of getting that exposure to an outside market and so on. And now, you can see it on my bio as well, we just started Momo VC. It's an early stage VC fund for underrepresented founders. Our investors in the fund are Nepali and non-Nepali, and which is super, super exciting, right? Exciting not only because this is the first VC fund based in the US by Nepali investors, but the potential of it. What I'm so truly, truly passionate about is our network of fellow investors that will invest in Nepali companies with us. So that's super exciting. We're also working with USA to figure out how to help Nepali companies here. In terms of entrepreneurship, we just signed an MOU with FWIN, a Female Entrepreneurs Association, to give them market access and everything. One company that's here, Nepal Tea, we helped them a little bit in terms of their fundraising. They got a $1 million grant from USAID, and we're really excited to see companies like that flourish, whether it's through the Great Nepali Diaspora or Momo VC. The last thing I'll mention is one of the things we're trying to do with the Great Nepali Diaspora. There's so many use cases in terms of what we've done for startups, for creatives, and whatnot, but women empowerment has been an incredible thing that we really want to champion. We want to showcase the best practices that we're learning around the world and showcasing here. So we started the Women Empowered Network with Saloni and some incredible ladies like Sophia, Trisha, Kishu, and we're really trying to also train Nepali women in terms of everything from networking to women entrepreneurship and so on. We have a series of workshops going on with that. So lots of things. I hope everybody can ask me questions later, but I want to end with one quick thing. In Nepal especially, we've all heard, I've heard this so many times growing up, and I'm sure you've heard some version of it, right? That we want to make Nepal into the next Switzerland, or Nepal into the something, right? I think a more practical sense is why don't we connect the dots? Why don't we connect the diaspora to other, stakeholders like donor agencies, like other, entities, and actually make it happen? So, thank you.
Thank you, Preeti. No, this is amazing. I think we've, sort of whenever we have these type of events, we are navigating across multiple questions. And as you know, I mean, Shamika had a very strong presentation, and as she was putting up the startup stuff, we saw, you know, the progress. A lot of that is based on entrepreneurship and the private sector growth, and that's what Nepal Economic Forum really believes in. And then Preeti talks about many things, and it's a heart, at the core is entrepreneurship. It's about, you know, private, individual, professional, that moving forward. So we now have the next speaker, Saloni Setia, who is also an advisory board member at the Nepal Economic Forum. And Saloni is going to share her own experience of connecting with multiple groups, with multiple organizations, so which is part of the, I mean, she runs her own business, but apart from that, she's been at the Global Shapers Network of the World Economic Forum. She's been part of the Stanford Seed program, now currently with the South Asia program she's been involved with, and many such programs where it is about connecting, again, connecting with entrepreneurs and connect with professionals, and she will come and share her experience, and then we'll go into having some questions on the floor. Over to you, Saloni.
Thank you, Sujeev. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a lot, Sujeev, once again, for the opportunity to speak on a topic which I think I deeply resonate with. I think most of the time, you know, when people think of me, they just also think of me as the connector. You know, oh, do you know this person? Do you know someone in this organization? So I think the topic just resonates. Globalization today has shaped our world, right? We might be, you know, a silo in Nepal, but we are also part of this global village where borders seem less defined and economies, societies, and even cultures are more interconnected than ever. From local businesses selling goods globally to tech startups excelling around the world, digital technologies and a connected economy have helped Nepali entrepreneurs expand their reach and bring innovative solutions everywhere. We know of multiple businesses that are harnessing digital platforms to access market data and today connect buyers directly with value chains across borders. So, you know, when Sujeev told me I had to speak at this event and there was, you know, Dr. Shamika and then Preeti going to speak, I'm just thinking, what am I going to add here? You know, how do I bring value? And then I thought, let me just speak about my own personal experiences, about how a lot of platforms, global connections have opened doors to powerful networks. Each of these platforms that I've engaged with has led to a real sense of appreciation and strength for a connected economy. I want to start with Stanford Seed. Last year, I was a part of the Stanford Seed program. For all of you who don't know about the program, it's a program run by Stanford Business School that empowers entrepreneurs from emerging economies with knowledges and tools to grow their businesses sustainably. So through Stanford, I was able to work with, you know, experts, peers from diverse backgrounds from South Asia regions, not necessarily only Nepal, but India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And the program didn't just help me redefine my business strategy, but if I think of it, what was my biggest takeaway? What did I learn most out of it? Was the fact that it made me think globally. It made me think about, you know, how do I look at my venture with a much broader potential? How do I look at global business processes that have been used, and how do I bring it back to Nepal, you know, to use in our context? And when you meet entrepreneurs from the region, it doesn't matter. Regardless of geography, regardless of which industry, you realize everyone is sharing the same common challenge. You know, you could be in two completely different industries, but somehow, you know, the solutions are the same, and you only learn when you connect with each other. The Entrepreneur Organization, EO, as we say, is a global peer-to-peer network of over 20,000 business owners globally across 220 chapters from 80+ countries. As a member of EO, I've had the pleasure to connect with fellow like-minded entrepreneurs who all have one common commitment, and that is this shared passion, you know, for personal and professional growth. EO's focus on lifelong learning experience is truly incredible. You know, it opens up your doors, it opens up your access to a whole bunch of speakers, workshops, which you normally don't think about. And being a part of EO also is another place that exemplifies how interconnectedness today in a global network not only builds resilience, but also fosters learning and inspiration that drives us to new heights. Now, as Sujeev said, one of the things I'm most grateful for is having spent my late 20s as part of the Global Shapers community. You have to be young to be a member, so you become an alumni once you're 30. But for those who don't know, Global Shapers is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. And it is a group of young, committed leaders who are all working towards driving social change and tackling critical issues today. As a shaper, I was able to connect with like-minded people who are also thinking beyond business. So, we worked on topics like mental health, climate change, reskilling. And it's very inspiring to see, how we do things here locally, and then the way it evolves when it goes globally. Because we had multiple projects that we did, multiple things that we did, which we started at a local level, but then, other chapters, other cities around the world picked it up. So this experience reinforced how collaboration can amplify the impact we are making towards, our community, and kind of again fosters back to how the connected economy works. As Preeti mentioned, closer to home, she, me, Kisu, Trisha, we've started the Empowers Women Network. And, when you organize these workshops, when you bring people together, you see how women gain confidence, skills. And this, again, is a testament to the power of support and knowledge the connected economy brings. And finally, through my podcast, I don't know how many of you have heard it, but I also do a podcast called Unheard with Saloni. So with that, the aim is to share stories of remarkable women across Nepal and beyond. And it's not only just about sharing entrepreneurial stories. It's about connecting these experiences with listeners globally, helping people get inspiration, bridging the gap, connecting Nepal to global audiences. And in a way, it's about building a platform that fosters empathy, more awareness, and also builds more connection. Now, I've been talking a lot about myself here. So I thought, it's not just me, but we have a whole bunch of entrepreneurs who all seem to embody the connected economy. When we talk of Nepali companies today, when you talk of, there's a lot of conversation about times when Nepal is not growing. I know Sujeev is always agrees to disagree and says that we have a very big economy here. But when we talk of growth, I think the first industry, let's say, that comes to your mind today is tech, right? Because you see all these tech companies coming across Nepal doing very well. And, when I think of tech companies, one of the first companies that comes to my mind is Grepsa. Grepsa was also part of the Stanford Seed program. They offer data extraction and web scraping services to clients worldwide. In fact, 100% of their clientele is international. They don't have any Nepali customers, right? And it's amazing to see how today you can leverage a skilled workforce back in Nepal. You leverage the cloud technology and do things in a global scale where you're not only competing at a global scale, but in the industry they are making a mark in the global scale. Non-profits leveraging global networks. I think we can not start with Nepal Economic Forum, right? We see one non-profit here which we really leverage on the connected economy, starting with events like NEFmeet. Every time there is here, Sujeev gets speakers from all over the world to come and speak. And that is exactly what a connected economy does. One other organization, that I wanted to bring up was Canopy Nepal. Canopy Nepal is a non-for-profit run by a young social entrepreneur, Mohit Ronyar, who's dedicated to changing the Nepali educational landscape by providing equitable access to learning for underprivileged students. Now, since it started in 2016, they've created innovative programs for storytelling to empower kids who don't have access because of financial limitations or resource scarcities, and empower them with skills, creativity, and resilience. Now, why am I talking about a non-for-profit working in the education landscape? Because Canopy, with its international chapters, they have a chapter in France, in the US, they've been able to leverage global networks for fundraising, resources, and partnerships. These chapters across have not only provided them financial support, but also engaged international members who want to contribute to Canopy in Nepal. This global collaboration has helped them to reach members all over the world. And now with the chapter coming in UK, they're not only looking at just doing fundraising for Nepal, but they're also looking at implementing the programs that they created here for Nepali children initially, doing that in the UK. So I think that's the entire charm of everything being connected. And we can't not talk about Nepal and talk about Nepali businesses. Preeti mentioned Nepal Tea Collective, NEFmeet, which was also, I think, a part of the TGND network. Again, for people who don't know, NEFmeet is a platform that connects local artisans with global consumers, allowing them to sell handcrafted products internationally. So they've been able to utilize e-commerce and digital marketing strategies to enable artisans to reach customers beyond Nepali borders, something that they couldn't even have thought of 10 years ago. All these examples, I think, illustrate how Nepali entrepreneurs and organizations today are leveraging connections, global networks, digital technologies, and can serve as inspiring models for other companies to do the same. But one of the most important and I think powerful results of a global economy, which I even connected with, what Stanford Seed helped me was to think big, to think global. Right? A connected economy empowers entrepreneurs to do that. And a great example of that is Manish and Preeti's project, the Himalayan Monsters. This creative series weaves together stories, products, games inspired by legendary creatures from Himalayas, blending ancient folklore with a modern twist to engage today's children. Their vision isn't to create something for Nepali children anymore, but to build a global brand that showcases and celebrates the rich stories of the entire Himalayan region. And when we say Himalayas, we're not only saying Nepal, right? We're seeing India, Bhutan, all the other countries in the region. So they are building a brand that showcases and brings this unique heritage to audiences across the world. So while a connected economy brings many opportunities, there are always challenges. For me as an entrepreneur, which I think in conversations with other entrepreneurs we agree, is one of the biggest challenges is that of the size of a limited market. Now I understand we have a population of 30 million, we have a growing population, we are cushioned between India and China, so there is, but for a lot of, I would say for a lot of businesses, if you just cater to the local market, after a point you can hit a gap, right? So to truly grow and scale, you have to look beyond Nepal's borders. We have to look, Dr. Shamika shared about how the growing India's, the states, right? They all share borders with Nepal. We also need to figure out how we can tap into those regions. So, but while our ambitions are global, Nepal's strict regulatory framework kind of limits how we expand internationally. For instance, setting up a company outside Nepal is almost impossible due to stringent foreign exchange controls and government regulations. So if I feel as a business, let me set up something outside, let me hire international talent, it makes it very difficult to do it. Without the ability to move funds internationally, take up opportunities abroad, it kind of makes scaling up a much harder and a more lengthy and resource-intensive program. Yet, these limitations also drive us to be resilient and resourceful. I think Nepalis are some of the most resourceful people who have to find innovative ways to achieve their global ambitions. So for Nepalis, succeeding globally does not only require skill and vision, but also a very strong commitment to navigating these boundaries that are set by these. So as we reflect on the power and potential of a connected economy, I want to leave you with 3 key insights from today. First, a connected economy empowers entrepreneurs to think beyond our local market, enabling us to bring unique ideas and innovations to the world. We no longer have to dream of just being local. We can dream big on a global scale and turn these dreams into reality. Second, the strength of networks, whether it's through technology, communities, or shared purpose. This can all fuel our ability to learn, grow, and expand our impact. Communities built through programs like Stanford Seed or through TGND or Global Shapers all illustrate that while working together, we can overcome these challenges and amplify our reach. And finally, while there might be regulatory constraints, we might be able to do something, we might not be able to do something about. These also just strengthen our resilience and creativity, because I think Nepali entrepreneurs have shown that with perseverance, we can navigate and transform these boundaries to pave the way for the future. So I hope that today I leave you all inspired as Nepalis who can achieve what they want in this global village. Together, let's continue to build, connect, and thrive, building Nepal's potential to the world stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Saloni. So I know many of our friends in the room, when they ask me, how can you stay so optimistic in Nepal? How can you have so many positive stories to tell? And these are the people I get inspired with. These are the people I hang out with. You know, each one of them, many of them have some great stories. So we literally live in two Nepals. There's one Nepal that keep continuously complaining, keep talking about the challenges, the problems, and there is a Nepal that is doing wonderful stuff. So with that, no, thank you very much, Saloni. So with that, I think I'm looking at the clock also. Maybe we can have around a 15 minutes Q&A, a few questions from the floor, interactions. So may I request the three panelists to just come on stage. You have a microphone here. I'm going to run around with the microphone. So please, people who would like to ask a question or make an intervention. So that's a 60-second rule, not in minutes. I talk in seconds. So 60 seconds rule. Questions, interventions, anything that you would want to ask the panelists or make a comment.
My name is Joyjit Borjalama. I'm currently doing A-levels. I'm with my friend Arjun Casey, who is also doing A-levels with me. So my question is directly towards Dr. Ravi. So there were challenges faced by India and Nepal during previous blockades. So in your view, will there be any assurance given by India that the same thing won't repeat in the future? Thank you.
My name is Samriti Marjan, and I just finished my A-levels this year. So as a future economist enthusiast, I wanted to ask my question to Saloni and Dr. Shamika as well. So Saloni mentioned how with a connected economy, we want to focus on expanding entrepreneurship towards a global scale. And Ms. Shamika mentioned how we want to tap into our domestic markets instead in order to prevent external shocks, right? So in your perspective, what do you think is the best direction that the Nepalese economy should take, the Nepalese market must take, in order to fulfill both a domestic and a global market? Is my question clear?
My name is Sujeev Shakya. I'm an economist turned a filmmaker. I just produced a film called Shambhala, and it has been nominated by our government to Oscar. So I want to use this connected economy to campaign our movie in Oscar. So I need your help.
So that was an unintended plug-in. Vibhakar is also a senior distinguished fellow at the Nepal Economic Forum, lives in Richmond, Virginia. So it's a very connected economist.
Thank you very much for great conversation, great information. Very good to know that there are people actually really concerned about Nepal from the outside. Also the great experience of the India as well. One of the questions, I have two questions I have. One is, yes, I'm the head of the UN Population Fund. My name is Young. I come from Korea. Even though we have a lot of problems. It's not that easy to see just a nice graph, but we have a lot of social problems. First question, I was quite intrigued that the culture, I'm sure over time, India actually has adopted very much data-driven, statistical used policy development. How those culture cultivate within the government? That's number one question. Second, all the diasporas and also youth representative, very good to know that there are those entrepreneurship, the supporting, mentoring, etc. How we can actually bring your voices to really make sure that it is represented at the government policy making. Because entrepreneurship still 80%, 90% have failed after a few months later. So there has to be a lot of fundamental shift of the regulatory regime, investment policy. In the 16th development plan, manufacturing sector budget allocation, agriculture exactly the same in this country. So there are a lot of issues we need to bring your voice to be part of the decision making, how we can create that representation. Through what platform?
Hi everyone. My name is Aman. Recently returned to Nepal and also engaged with NEF. First question to Dr. Ravi. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the red growth area that you mentioned, which is around India's borders, especially in the context that we are the least connected region in the world, and how do you see cross-border prospects for Nepal and beyond? A shout out to Preeti for mentioning something I really resonate with, is the connection economy, which is, in my opinion, the pillar to a connected economy. We really always seem to overlook the value of relationships in favor of short-term gains. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And finally, probably to Saloni or for the whole panel, we mentioned the IT sector. It's growing in Nepal. IT consulting is growing. A couple of years ago, around 6% of the foreign exchanges was brought in through this sector. But one of the things that concerns me is most of these players are producing outputs or products for firms and institutions based abroad. So perhaps a conversation on how can we ensure that communities in Nepal also get the dividends, and I'm not only talking about economic dividends, but also value dividends from these outsourcings. Thank you.
Thanks, Sujeev. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sneh Rajbandari. I work with Coca-Cola here, and I'm also an advisory board member of the Nepal Economic Forum. I just wanted to ask one question in terms of how we always talk about how technology has a role to play as an equalizer and also has a role to play in connecting us all and economies as well. But in the context of India and Nepal, it'd be great to hear from you how India has managed to leverage technology so that the development happening across is also inclusive in the entrepreneurial space, and how maybe Nepal can learn from that, because I feel like there's still much we can do in terms of digital citizenship. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Ankit Arya. As I was going through the slides of Shamika ma'am, what I saw there was, I guess, you could not speak on that, but there was one thing, unique Indian model where India moved from agriculture to service industry, skipping the manufacturing, and you were saying that India is back to manufacturing. I hope you can elaborate more on that, how it is back. And one more thing is that, I guess in the context of Nepal can move to direct service industry, skipping the manufacturing, because in our context, our country is too small. Manufacturing might not be feasible for us, for our economy, but service industry, the growth of service industry might be that boom sector, might be that factor which can boost our economy. Please elaborate. Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Vidushi Rana. I'm from manufacturing, and we've been exporting to India for 35 years now. So my question to you is, it was a very elaborate, it's great to see that India is growing leaps and bounds, and as neighbors, we're very happy to see that. But since there are very few manufacturing in Nepal, and we export to India, so how do we see ourselves? Is there any kind of protection from Nepali manufacturers, or is India just promoting Make in India? So that's a question.
Let me start with the data-driven policy making. We are not there yet. It's a very large country. And when I was younger and I would hear people say, India's too large, I would often think, it's a cop-out. Maybe we aren't looking enough, and that's why India becomes an exception to a lot of the global rules as far as development work is concerned. But when you look at the data, over the years, many held hypotheses, like government spending too much usually crowds out private investment. It holds for all countries except India. So now the more data I see, India does emerge as an exception to a lot of the rules, but that is also because we are very large and very diverse. And the federal nature of the economy is beautiful, but it also lends to highly unequal, but at the same time very diverse economic engines, right? Sikkim has had a 12 times increase in consumption, per capita consumption, 12 times in the last 10 years. Can you imagine the kind of economic growth Sikkim is seeing? And then just adjacent, next door, if we look at Nagaland, we're wondering, well, it's keeping up with all India, but often tends to fall because it fundamentally depends on government sector. Government sector by itself is never a very fast growing. So you need a completely different model, right? Though the terrain is similar and you can think of many similar models to sort of emulate. So I think data-driven policy making is desirable. We are beginning to see that increasingly at the ground level. For instance, when I think of neonatal deaths, babies within 28 days of birth when they die. So it's a 12-block problem, which means you need to isolate the problem, and data is really the only way to do it, right? But a lot depends on local government capacity. We are assuming we have the data. The data is also generated by the same system. So if you have garbage data, you're going to come out with garbage analysis, and then policies which will not make sense. They are too simplistic, let's say. So I think as a data scientist, as an empiricist or an applied economist, let me tell you, I put a lot of faith in data because in a world which is extremely driven by emotions and feelings, data is as objective relatively as we can get. That's why I put so much faith in data. But as a data scientist and an economist, I also know that there are limitations to data. So we can't, for instance, the system becomes very data hungry. We want the doctors and nurses to put up the latest information on the baby born and the weight of the baby, but that is not the best use of the doctor's time. We have very few doctors. And if we're going to be so data hungry that we're going to waste the doctor's time, I'm using it very responsibly, that is not going to be the right. So which means we have to get better data. We need an entire cadre of people who are only entering data, who understand this international code as far as diseases, etc. How do you end? So this is an entire new machinery which we are creating. A lot of public policy and policy making is also an act of leap of faith. You don't have enough number. For instance, if you compared Andhra Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh 20 years back, historical data is what you look at when you predict the future or you're recommending a policy. But as an economist, we have very little to say about, let's say, political entrepreneurship. And suddenly you have a chief minister in the form of Chandrababu Naidu who completely breaks the past trend and goes and sits outside Microsoft office in Seattle and insists to Bill Gates that you're going to set up the second largest office of Microsoft after Seattle in Hyderabad. And he makes it happen. If you look at past data, it was an agriculture state, it's a large state, high poverty, with very few engineering colleges. Why Microsoft go to Hyderabad? So past data is never always sufficient to predict future. That's where entrepreneurship, it's so wonderful to hear about entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is also about bucking the trend which is not okay. We want to buck a lot of trends in these parts of the world because there is so much growth to catch up, right? So I think data-driven, I have a lot of faith in it, but by no means should we make it, give it an absolutist status. I think there's a big role for democracy, so political leadership. There's a big role for the market, so we also have to give a lot of faith to private enterprises. On the question of connectivity, in fact, it's fascinating because the data I showed you is satellite image data. So it's not a survey data of how much people eat and whatever. There's no reporting bias. This is 10 meter into 10 meter data which is capturing actual growth on the ground. Is there a house? Is there a road? Is there a water tank? A bank? A school? So this is actual surface area which is getting captured, right? The highest growth is in those pockets which you saw becoming more and more red. And so it's all around Nepal, which is UP, northern Bihar, Uttarakhand, have some of the fastest growing connectivity and growth in terms of infrastructure and connectivity, which is happening in India. So we basically, the entire neighborhood around Nepal is growing at a rate which is unprecedented for us. But that also means that right across the border, there is a market. So I really think we need to get a lot done between the UP government in Nepal, between Uttarakhand government and Nepal, between Bihar government and Nepal. Because I think that is the phase in India where we are now. That the central government has it facilitates. There is a vision, there are larger national policies. It facilitates, but the actual implementation and making the projects take off is very much a state government. So I really think, Sujeev, as a next step, we should take some of these ideas and work with the local governments to really experiment and try something new, particularly around tech, where it should be relatively easier. Right? I'm not going to speak about blockades. I hope that part of our history is far behind. We're a young and fast-moving, hugely aspirational country, as are you, and we have a lot more in common. On Korea, just one point, just because you're from Korea and from the population, UNFPA, there is a declining fertility crisis. And because you're from Korea, it immediately struck me as the country with the lowest fertility. These are traditional parts of the world. right? Unlike Europe and the US or Latin America, Asia, and this part of Asia, is very, very tradition bound. We are family oriented, we like children, we want to have families and so on. But we are also modernizing very fast, which means we are urbanizing very fast, we are nuclearizing very fast, which means the joint family system is now giving way to nuclear families. And with women entering the labor force, the direct cost is on fertility. No economy in the world, including Japan and Korea, have managed to surmount this catastrophic decline. Migration is a solution, but it is never an easy solution. For large countries like ours, in fact, we are saying that where the fertility is declining faster, we must encourage greater flow from states where the fertility continues to be. It's falling everywhere, but certain parts are higher. I think we need to also think this across the region, right? But this is a direct cost of women entering labor force and breakdown of family structure, right? Or change in family structure. It's not an easy solution. I wish I could tell you economists or anyone has a solution to this, but it is something we should talk about, because we almost believe that women working outside the house is wonderful, but women working in the house to raise a family, somehow we tend to discount it. So the changing value system is not keeping pace with what might be, overall good for the society as a whole. And as a female economist, when I often speak to young women, my job is to also tell them these are the true costs. Right? You're true. When we tell them you can do everything, I think we have to be realistic and pragmatic and tell them that no, you will have to raise children, your husband can be helpful, your spouse might be helpful, but at the end of the day, the costs borne by women is disproportionately higher. And now we also have an aging population. We have 120 million people above the age of 60. And care burden is almost entirely on the shoulders of women. Right, so.
I think there was a question from there. I'll just keep it short, but it's about start local, think global. Start local, go global. Right? Because you said where we need to be thinking. So as an entrepreneur, she mentioned the fact a lot of entrepreneurs fail, right? So it's very important to start small. You start locally, test it out. But then you don't want to be just there in that one tiny village. You want to be in the entire global village. So then you need to think of scale and how you can really broaden your horizons. Yeah.
So I'll connect this to why I do everything I do. So just for context, my background is tech, but as a non-technical person, I used to be the VP of marketing of an AI startup, Fuse Machines, which is one of the first Nepali companies to have an IPO later this year. So what I realized working with that startup is that you can, given the right branding and marketing and all of it, you can change a company's destiny, right? But then there's also this factor of capital or investment where, along with a good idea, a good team and everything, I think a capital, again, can do the same. When I was advising, I advised a lot of startups from around the world, and one thing that would come up again and again is scale, right? For example, a lot of Nepali companies that are building, I think they have good ideas, they are building good companies. What would happen is when an investor would look at it, they would always be like, the market size is too small. It's not India, right? So one sort of suggestion, or one thing that we've actually been really working at actively, is teaching people how to not just think as Nepal as the market, right? One thing we also realized is, for a startup, it's pretty easy to start a startup. But at some point, you need additional help, right? Not just seed money, but you need experts that maybe know the regional market, that maybe have go-to-market expertise or global marketing expertise and so on. So what we're hoping is, companies, entrepreneurs in Nepal, one, before they actually even start building their companies, maybe they have, domain experts from all industries in the community that they can really connect with, right? That can almost help them think of ideas to build companies. Just as an example, if a company based in Nepal wants to build a healthcare, wants to have healthcare clients in the US, they cannot just sit here with no context and try to build something, right? What we're hoping is through our community, people have that exchange so that, of course there's, regulations and so on, but in terms of domain expertise, they get to start building companies that actually might be viable. And then once they reach a certain level, they are also, again, getting that expertise of people that can help them, become regional startups or even think globally. So.
Okay, thank you very much. So a round of applause to our panelists. It's been a great afternoon. I know it's gone a bit beyond our schedule, but I think 3 takeaways I would say. I would love to always have takeaways. So 3 takeaways is, since our ambassador designate is also here, Shamika, what you suggested, definitely we can start working on with the different governments. There is an effort that already in his couple of years of his tenure, Ambassador Shankar Sharma was working on, so we would definitely further that. You talked about the care economy. Our next issue of our quarterly publication, NEFpot, will be on care economy. So a couple of weeks back, I was in Bangkok at the Regional Care Forum, where I was moderating a panel on private capital into the care system, because that's going to be, the discourse at least has started. We are amplifying, so this is also a partnership with UN Women. We are doing it. And finally, the third, what has come out is the Think Local and Go Global. And I think as sponsors of Nepal Economic Forum, BEAD, we have been trying to think like a global company operating in 10 countries now, with an office in Kigali, Rwanda, and we are collaborating with collaborators from around the world and sort of competing and also collaborating with global firms. And I think it's also that you can be a Nepali firm and also can, think global. And I think this is something very close to me at a personal level. So just before I end, for many of you who don't know, we have a lot of products that come into every day. We have a product for you. We have our quarterly products, NEFbot, there's NEFtake. We do these NEF talks and NEF searches. So every day, if you'd sign in for our newsletters, or follow us on different social media platforms, we have our NEF View and other do you know Nepali Weekly Economic Update, also a data portal with over 300 pieces of data. That's what especially researchers and students love. And there's a QR code going on a bit later, so you can scan and support us. This is always good to have a pitch around this. So before I end, you can't do an event like this without without many people working behind. And thank you to all the team members. I don't want to name them because there are so many people who are involved with this. And a big shout out to ISIS, Padam and his team on camera, and the Hotel Yakinyeti. Please do join us for tea, coffee, and conversations. Thank you all. Once again, the panelists, and you for your attention.